what do I mean by 21st century issues? What I mean, what I would say quickly before I get into that, I would say kind of 2 or 3 things we should be doing, right? Managing these tactical issues in their appropriate space. They're not unimportant, but manage them. Second, really take a hard look at some of the more traditional pillars in the alliance. Security, you could argue economics and trade. We can go through the sort of particulars between each of those pillars, and really see what needs a refresh, what's working, what needs a reset, but more work, what I would call in those foundational issues, to make sure those are growing in proportion to the challenges we face. And finally, what I would say is expand into what I would call the new frontiers, 21st century issues like cyber, fourth industrial revolution, AI, global health, space, all of those, I would say energy, environment, those types of issues that are really unique areas where we've done some good work before. There are logical handles on which to grab, but we could do a lot more and really harness the power of these 21st century issues and bring in new constituencies, new voices into the alliance as well. And almost all of them have a, you know, for this audience, have a profound security implication, right? I mean, energy, right? I mean, energy security front and center, right? And so we could sort of go through a space, right? You know, that's one with an obvious security and geopolitical nexus as well. So we could go through the particulars there, but that's what I would say in terms of where we should be thinking about next. And then what I'll just end on is that the good news is that there's a lot of what I would say strong foundational elements around that can be quickly utilized if we want to sort of rebalance or shift a little bit in terms of our thinking, right? The alliance still has incredibly capable alliance managers on both sides of the Pacific, right? Second, there is strong bipartisan support in the Congress and the American people for the US-ROK alliance. And third, I would say in Washington and Seoul, there are a lot of senior policymakers who are quite interested, quite engaged. And so I think it's not hard to basically, what I would say, I wouldn't say a reset, I wouldn't say a rebalance, I just say shifting on the front foot. And that's kind of where I would just stop at the outset in terms of opening comments on the alliance. The only other thing I think that we deserves comment is obviously North Korea, right? Everybody here, it's extant. We could talk Japan, we can talk China. I'm sure we'll get into those as well. But North Korea, obviously, you probably need to say something about it at the outset here. What I would say is, you know, I tend to think there's pretty good alignment right now, but I think that where we really need to watch the space and what does not get enough attention in Washington is the inter-Korean piece. The inter-Korean piece, obviously, the Moon Jae-in administration is very keen on this. You know, you look at their policies, their speeches, their personnel, they are lining up in that direction to do something big, bold in that space. And how the alliance manages the inter-Korean piece with the denuclearization missile issues on DPRK, sanctions relief, the region, that I think will be an important foundational element for North Korea policy to sort through in the coming weeks, months, years, to make sure we do stay relatively on track. You know, we can recount the history, we can recount the summits, all of that. What I'm just saying where we are in 2020 is, you know, pretty good alignment on a number of things, but the inter-Korean piece is one to watch, could, if not handled right, create friction, tensions. And so it's incumbent on alliance managers like all of you, which, you know, I used to count myself among the lucky chosen few. That is a really important piece of business that's got to get done, got to get managed right. And oh, by the way, does not get enough attention, and nobody gets enough credit for these things back in Washington. So with that, I think that's kind of my opening, and more than happy to take questions or take the conversation anyway you guys want to go.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I do have a lot of questions concerning the alliance. Before we get to those, first question I have is an exceptionally difficult one. Assistant Secretary of Defense, Ambassador to Republic of Korea, VP at Boeing, now Policy Chief at YouTube. Any of those achievements are enough for a lifetime. Can you first please just tell us about your career and how you were able to achieve such positions? How does one of the members joining us today follow in your footsteps?
Oh, no, thanks. Thanks for the question, Major. I really appreciate it. I guess first, my mom basically thinks I can't keep a job, and I'll just start with the other part that keeps you a little bit humble at times is I remember just one quick anecdote. Our neighbors, for when I was 5 years old, came to visit me when I was ambassador. I showed them all around Seoul, took them to a diplomatic reception we're having in the residence. They stayed with us in the residence, drove them around the limo, to a couple places. We kind of, it was the red carpet treatment. So I dutifully reported to my mother what I did. And she said, well, that's what the ambassador does to every American who visits Korea, right? And I'm like, no, it's with all respect, there are some other things that I do besides, play host to American tourists who happen to be going through Seoul, who are my neighbors. So anyway, it's good to know that, your mom from salt of the earth from Norton, Kansas is keeping you humble each and every day. I guess what I would say is, look, this was an accidental journey. It was not like I sat down and I figured out how to get from here to there. And I think the biggest thing that that always kind of guided me is the here and the now, right? Enjoy. It's a little corny, but the journey, not the destination. That has served me well because I took jobs generally for the intrinsic value and the interest I had for them at the time. And that explains kind of how I became a Navy officer, reservist, mobilization, one of the best jobs I ever had in my life. I mean, it was, fantastic. So it was less about thinking through how I would get to certain levels or become a Senate confirmed official or a policy advisor. It was more about following my interests, believe it or not. And that's kind of how I ended up where I am. And some of it is just, I tell people in Washington, these jobs that, assistant secretary, undersecretary, those types of jobs, you just have to be proximate. You stand close to the pile and sometimes the ball pops out in your direction. And I'll end with just a quick anecdote here. I mean, my life took a completely different turn by just a strange set of circumstances. I had a job I loved, working on the Senate Appropriations Committee, State Foreign Operations Subcommittee. It is a great job. I love that job. I met my wife through that job. My boss was in my wedding. It was Senator Leahy, who's still in the Senate. Love Vermont, all of it. Just the full package. And it was really fun to do it in a bipartisan way. The Republican counterpart was Senator McConnell. Two polar opposites ideologically, but worked closely together to construct foreign assistance, State Department funding. Great job. All right, so I love the job. About 5 years in, having a bad day on the job, didn't get invited to some senior staff retreat, some perceived slight, right, protocol issue. And I call up my friend to complain, I'm never getting ahead. I was kind of angry. And he goes, well, go interview with this new guy. He's looking for a foreign policy advisor. And I was like, I like this stuff. Just go interview. It'll be great. Well, turns out the guy I called was Dennis McDonough, who would later be the White House Chief of Staff. And the new senator that I was supposed to be interviewed with was Barack Obama. And so there I was. I found myself in short order in the transition office of Barack Obama with Robert Gibbs, who went on to become the White House spokesperson. And we're interviewing. And I guess the end here is, the end of the story is when you don't really want a job, you do well in the interview, right? I every time I want a job, I do terrible in the interview, right? I'm nervous, pressure. I was relaxed. It was really fun. We connected on a lot of issues. I got the job offer, and that became a completely different life path. So it's all a long way of saying, like, it was about a lot about the journey along the way. Nobody knew at that time that Barack Obama was going to become the president of the United States. He was a freshman senator from Illinois, very most junior member of the Foreign Relations Committee, and I left a perceived in the staff world a higher ranking job for a lawyer just because I was interested, wanted to do it, liked the guy, thought it would be a really rewarding job, and I guess I stood close to the pile and the ball bounced my way. Let's put it that way. And I didn't get mugged by an offensive lineman late after the play either. So I'll just stop there.
Wow, thank you. I'd like to shift back to Elias now. Next question we have is, when the DPRK fires missiles or makes threats, or we conduct large-scale exercises, those strategic assets in and out of theater, it always seizes command of the information space. Earlier, you were alluding to some of the things we can do outside of the security relationship. How do you see us building upon the alliance beyond the security relationship?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I guess what I would say is on DPRK, and let me just follow up if I don't answer the question directly. But I think, remember early on in the Obama administration, we were still in this cycle that was left over from the Bush administration, who, by the way, second term did some great work. Victor Cha, Mike Green, they did some great work on North Korea, and really managed some touchy times in the US-ROK alliance. So this isn't a knock against especially the second term Bush administration's work. I mean, we can have a conversation about the agreed framework, which, we can, that I have, strong views on. But I think by the time that rolled around, there was some very skillful work, and especially in some posture moves, things like that are bearing fruit today. You can argue the 2005 joint statement's a pretty good piece of work. If we could get back to that as the framework, that would be a very good starting point, and a roadmap. There are elements of a roadmap in there. I guess what I would say is that, though, remember, we were in this cycle where the North Koreans would do something, there would be a reaction. North Koreans would do something, there'd be a reaction. And the goal of the Obama administration is kind of break that cycle. And that's where the term, not the policy, the term, which the late Ambassador Bosworth used, the strategic patience came from, right? So I think one of the early goals that we did achieve was to break that cycle. And I think it is important that you are not letting the North Koreans dictate the pace, dictating the terms of the engagement based on kind of what they do in the moment. Now, they're always going to do something to try to garner attention, right? And it will suck up the space, but how you react is important. You can generally control that as a government. The other point I would say off to the side was that I think what we've learned over time is when Kim Jong-un came into office, and look, there are many people deeper and more experts, so happy to take comments, criticism, amendments in basically everything I say, but particularly on this stuff. I think people were interested to see, well, is this, guy who's young, was raised in Switzerland, or, went to boarding school in Switzerland, is he going to represent a new type of leadership? And what we've seen is that, basically a strategy of damn the torpedoes, to use a Navy term. We're going to build the nuclear missile programs out as big as we can. We're not going to really entertain any serious formal economic reform. And then we're going to kind of go from there. And really, the data, I believe, has shown the things that this regime responds to the most is pressure with some off-ramps for negotiation. That's, if you're asking me how we got to the summits in Singapore, a big piece of that was the pressure strategy undertaken late Obama and early Trump, where we have maximalist UN Security Council resolutions for the first time coming through in 2016, piled on thereafter, that have caused a lot of pressure. And prior to kind of recent years, we had more alignment than we otherwise have had in recent memory with the Chinese, with the Russians, with other members of the Security Council. That has since frayed, but I think that was important in getting them to the table. So you're asking me, what can we do as an alliance? I think it's work on a strategy, and the strategy has elements of pressure and it has elements of off-ramps, right? And how you structure that within the alliance, I think, is important. There's obviously an inter-Korean piece, generally speaking, that you want to bring into that. There's the Security Council multilateral piece. There's the regional coordination piece. There's the very important bilateral piece between Washington and Seoul. But I think first principles are first principles. If you don't have strong alignment, you can have disagreements, mind you, but generally strong alignment between Washington and Seoul, you're just building on a foundation that is relatively shaky and gives you a lower probability to succeed in a really, really tough, complicated problem to begin with.
Most definitely. So Mr. Ambassador, in your opening comments, you mentioned Japan, and then you also just mentioned regional engagement and alignment. So the U.S. maintains another alliance close by with Japan, a nation with sometimes tenuous approval ratings in the ROC. Notably, former Prime Minister Abe recently stepped down. He was notoriously unpopular with many Koreans, but with the ascendancy of Prime Minister Suga, what seemed to be like a cordial exchange between both sides, do you see an opening in ROC Japan for trilateral relations that we may be able to act on?
Yeah. A quick plug. I do this moderate kind of a discussion every other week for CSIS, and I ask the same question of Deputy Assistant Secretary Mark Napper, who served as the chargé in Seoul, and also speaks Japanese and is a real Japan hand. And I think his answer was instructive. That I think that, and Victor Cha also answered the same question, who I think, and the two of those answers I'll just summarize. But I think, obviously anytime you have a change in leadership, there's an opening, and that's of interest. But as Victor pointed out, the relationship it's not in a good place between Seoul and Tokyo right now. And that leads to challenges going forward. So I think that's one piece of it. Yes, there's a chance, but there's also some real issues that need to be resolved, and those issues are hard. Let me just say too, it makes some broader points. This is among the, these are tough, deep, rightly so emotional issues that are, really kind of at the fabric of some of the societies, right? Especially, I felt this in Korea, right? It is a really tough issue, and rightly so. The Wianbo, the comfort women, it is right at the center of these relationships, as well as some other issues that we all know well. I guess what I would say is maybe a little bit speaking to the U.S. role. I've always felt the U.S. role was a bit characterized, as a caricature, right? The media would, or others would point it as either the U.S. has to get involved in kind of shuttle diplomacy, or we just let them sort it out on their own, right? And and I will just say, I've had friends who generally are political appointees who argue this case. I tend to find in the State Department, career Foreign Service, there's a lot of reticence to get involved, understandably so, because it's sort of such a political issue between the two capitals. So what I would say is, I think that there's the sweet spot is that we don't ever pressure Tokyo and Seoul to get together. That will never work. We also don't want to get in the business of figuring out the fine contours of where that relationship should be. We don't want to dictate, in other words, kind of the market points. Seoul and Tokyo are two well-established governments with long diplomatic histories that are perfectly capable of doing that themselves. I think where our role comes is someone who really facilitates, is active, without pressure, short of pressure, but active, lets both sides know at the highest levels of government, especially the President of the United States, that this is important for the United States, that our allies find some common ground. Don't have to agree on everything, don't have to resolve every issue, but in our core strategic interest in the region, it's important to find common ground. And then finally, recognize that I actually had a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff tell me this. Well, they said, well, it's never a good time. And actually I said, my response was, actually, I think generally what you see is the relationship has ups and downs, and these times when there are windows of opportunity for better relations, like we had when I was ambassador between Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Abe, President Park Geun-hye, you sprint as fast as you can, as hard as you can through those windows, right? And you get the president involved. You do, when we were doing this with 15, 16, the White House Chief of Staff was involved, the Deputy National Security Advisor was involved, Deputy Secretary of State was involved. I mean, this was senior, high-level, global portfolio carrying officials in the US government who were involved. Again, not pressuring, but facilitating and making sure what you do see from time to time is a miscommunication and helping facilitate that piece as well. So that, I think, is the role. And I think you need not just a change of government in Japan, not just Seoul, I think, also getting more interested in this is Victor's theory, not mine, but Victor's theory. I want to give him credit there, finding it in their interest to get into that piece. But my big, I think, addition to what I stole from Victor and Mark is the US piece is really important, and it's really important at the highest levels of government, right? And I would also say the defense piece is also a big part of that for this audience. SecDef, Deputy SecDef, the chairman, all kind of working together on that. And, I'll get off the stage on this. It can be done, right? You look at what was accomplished. The Tokyo and Seoul found common cause on the Comfort Loan Agreement. They did GSOMIA in short order. There were multiple trilateral meetings at the Deputy Secretary of State level, Vice Foreign Minister level to coordinate policy. There were 2 trilateral summits. It's possible. It's very hard. It's very difficult. These are very tough issues, understandably so, but it's incumbent upon the United States, I think, to try to play a really important role as a facilitator in these 2 very important relationships.
Going back to the Iraq-US alliance for a bit, our next question is from Lieutenant Gregory Cabone, the U.S. Navy liaison to Iraq Joint Chiefs of Staff. Question is, do you think the U.S. should maintain its current military footprint on the Korean Peninsula? If so, for how long? And what enduring capabilities should be maintained for the long run?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is it's a footprint that is born out of a threat, right? And the threat is still extant and active. And so my answer would be yes. I'm a strong believer in the U.S. military presence in the Republic of Korea as well as in Japan. Having said that, it's I think important to constantly look at how you can adapt and evolve the alliance, right? The alliance looks very different today than it did in, say, 1957. So I think how we adapt is every bit as important of a question. And I think that is where we depend on folks like yourselves, right? To come up with that fresh thinking, to look for innovative solutions, to bring capabilities into the alliance, right? To bring thinking, policies, plans, doctrines, all of that. That is really, I think, the critical piece, right? Because, look, I think as long as we have a very real extant North Korea threat, you're going to, the alliance, there's going to be a need for U.S. troops on the peninsula. But in that space, how we work together is an important thing that is, I think, critical to the future of the alliance. And it's why we have MCM, SCM, all of these mechanisms. And it's why I hold them up as examples for the rest of the world. I mean, you can argue that this alliance is the most, there's a fair argument, having sat at a global position as Chief of Staff to the SecDef, you can argue that this is the most adaptable, the most evolved, the most capable U.S. alliance in the world, right? And there's a reason for that, right? There's a whole host of reasons for it, but one of them is some of the institutional mechanisms. Some of it is the willingness to evolve. Some of it is the incredible economic and cultural progress or social progress of the Republic of Korea, which is probably, arguably the sharpest democratic development model in the history of the world. All of that plays into it, but it's also been, part of it is there's just been a willingness to engage in a true partnership, true dialogue, undertake new initiatives with, I would argue, really good results. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, sir.
You mentioned also adapting to the threat to the north, specifically. Our next question comes from Lieutenant Ben White from the United Nations Command Honor Guard. KGU's speech at the 75th anniversary of the ruling party seemed softer than previous years. There was less bellicose rhetoric towards the U.S., recognized South Korea's fight against COVID-19, and even apologized to the North Korean people for not meeting economic goals in its 5-year plan. To you, does this signal an opportunity for détente, or is this an indicator of its diminished control of the elites? What are we to make of what seems to be a change in the tone?
Yeah, great question. I guess I would say there's a lot of expertise in the room who's more equipped than I am to answer this question. I always have sort of a joke that, I used to, when I was ambassador, you'd have these great North Korea analysts who would tell you, all right, if it's Wednesday, every North Korean sub's going to crazy Ivan to the starboard at the bottom of the hour. I am not of that depth in my North Korean analytical skills. But what I would humbly say is I do think the regime is under a lot of pressure. And I think that they're under a lot of pressure because, look, let's put it this way. There are still strong multilateral sanctions in effect, and also corresponding unilateral sanctions from a range of capitals around the world. And generally over time, you can argue the last 10 years, I think their diplomatic space has shrunk to some extent. Now, I think Kim Jong-un reopened some of that, but you look at, say, where you were in 2015, 16 with the DPRK foreign minister having a hard time getting into some countries. The Kirby report on human rights was devastating. So I think, and still net, I still think that their diplomatic space is less than it otherwise was, depending on which time marker you pick. So in that, you have all of that. And then on top of that, even though some of the multilateral sanctions have frayed to some extent, even though there's cheating, which has been documented in open sources, and even though there is some more diplomatic space these days than, say, 4 or 5 years ago, nonetheless, the foundations of those foundations remain very strong and active, and the Trump administration is really pushing those. On top of that, you have COVID. And COVID, in my view, has been devastating from the simple standpoint that for the DPRK has really taken extraordinary measures, and in those extraordinary measures to combat COVID, crushed a lot of the informal economic activity that is a critical coping mechanism for how they deal with hard currency shortages and making sure that their people are, have at least a basic level of livelihood, and they don't revert to the famines and food security issues rampant that we saw in the 1990s. So I do think that they are under pressure. I do think that there will be at some point a potential opening. I think that they probably, and this is kind of a Dr. Terry's analysis, probably will do the space to watch is not pre-U.S. election, it's election to to second term President Trump or first term President Biden. That window is what the space to watch in terms of provocative or a non-provocative signal that I think will be important to watch. We've seen this before, and some analysts think that there'll be, the North Koreans almost can't help themselves. There'll be some big provocation. It will force the U.S. to react, and then we're into a space where it takes years to dig out and see if we can get anywhere on negotiations. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope that there's a diplomatic off-ramp, and perhaps Kim Jong-un's speech signals something of that nature and a lack of provocations in that case. But to me, I still think COVID is a huge driver up in North Korea right now in terms of behavior, and I think this is uncharted territory, and how this plays out, I think, is very interesting. But I do think it provides for some interesting opportunities that we should be very mindful of going forward. And I'll stop there.
I'd like to expound on that a little bit. You mentioned looking for an opening. What would that opening look like, and what should the alliance or the community do should that opening appear?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, right now the issue is we're consumed by this summit leader to leader diplomacy, and most recently punctuated by Kim Jong-un's letter to President Trump, really a sign of expressing condolences or empathy or sympathy, whatever you want to call it, which we haven't seen on behalf of the North Koreans since I think 9/11 was the last time we saw something like that. So I think the question is, it gets complicated. Really depends on who wins the U.S. election, number one. Victor Cha is convinced, having talked to some people close to President Trump, that if President Trump's reelected, he will go for an early summit, and that's what the opportunity will look like. And then we're into all of the same pros and cons with the summits and I don't know what you call the meeting at the demilitarized zone. I guess they're not calling the summit a meeting, whatever you want to call it. Those three encounters, all the pros and cons come back to fore. I think one thing that I would underscore that another really smart North Korean analyst said that I think we have to be mindful of is, like, with the opportunity, there's also what we've seen from the summits is a lack of creative policy making or any flexibility from the North Koreans. I mean, there they were, President of the United States, interesting offers on the table, and no ability to move, right? So that's a key question to my mind, which is, at the leader level or the very senior level in DPRK decision making, have they learned or have they inculcated a lesson that some flexibility may be necessary even if dealing with the U.S. president at the leader level? I think that's an interesting question that a much smarter North Korean analyst posited to me. If President Biden wins, I don't know what the opportunity would look like. It'll be interesting to see if the Biden team tries to get this down away from the leader level and into maybe a Secretary of State level type of conversation, or maybe even lower. But that'll take a lot of energy to do. I think the North likes this channel at the leader level. I think they'll fight hard for it. You'll spend a lot of time trying to, inject a different interlocutor other than the leader, and that will take time. So, what the opportunity looks like a little bit with the Biden, if a Biden presidency is in the cards, mixed with perhaps an increased likelihood of provocation, those two elements strike me as it's probably a little longer term, not forever, because we tend to get close to negotiations over time, but probably we're going to spend a little more time searching for what that looks like than if President Trump is reelected. Stop there. And purely guesses too, by my, this is, if anybody, this is a really hard subject to be even like 10% right. So I'll give myself 3%. If I'm, in the 3% zone, then we'll count it.
Okay. I'll probably give myself less than 1%, so that's significantly more than me. I'd like to also shift elsewhere in the region, if you don't mind. This question comes from Ms. Tiek Wong, who's the Asia Director for the DCI. For a business that's building its footprint in Southeast Asia, how do you see Southeast Asia's role with regards to the alliance or the Indo-Pacific in the next 5 years? Kind of a multi-part question. How do you think the presidential election will impact those dynamics, especially in concern as it relates to the South China Seas, the Rockiest Alliance, or other alliance frameworks in Southeast Asia. I'm going to mute. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I went on mute. My apologies. I was flipping through to see who was on the call, and rookie mistake. I went on mute. All right. So look, I guess what I would say first, Southeast Asia is such an incredibly diverse place. You could spend a long time unpacking the region and the dynamics, and that's a really that's a whole nother exercise. So I'll just make some general comments. I mean, first, I would say there is, I think, an interest. There is an interesting possible confluence of interest in Southeast Asia between the U.S. and ROK. The ROK has its southern strategy. The U.S. has, over the past decade plus, been more engaged in terms of adding a permanent mission to ASEAN, playing more in the ADDM plus, the ASEAN different constructs, ASEAN plus 3 the ROC's playing, but bigger, the bigger constructs the U.S. plays. So there is, I think, an interesting handle in which to grab. What that translates into, I think the alliance has always had difficulty spelling that out, right, in terms of more concrete deliverables on the ground. Like, we've talked a lot about coordinating aid efforts throughout the region. That's interesting. What's the there? I don't know, but I think it's interesting to explore. I'm just not sure what's been accomplished there. I'd have to sort of dig into that. I think there's a lot of interest in, I think, the maritime security issues. I think, the ROCs will, by and large, I think you can, I guess what I would say is they do tend to believe in a free and open Indo-Pacific. I think they will just say it on their own terms. It will look a lot like what we say, but I think there'll be general alignment, and I think you can work with that. I've always felt that there's enough there to work with as ambassador. I mean, I used to get kind of, this question a lot when I was ambassador. So why aren't they saying more? And I said, well, look at the actual statements. They're quite good. Look what they're doing. It's quite good. And they're very involved in the region. So I think there's a lot of tools to work with, and focus on those tools and making something out of those tools versus, focusing on maybe the tiny bit of talking points that aren't, exactly word for word matched. I just always felt like, let's do. So I think that's the point. And I think the question is, what are we going to turn that into? I think that those are questions for either second Trump term, first Biden term. I will say that I do think that some of the differences, the Trump administration just undertook a trade action against Vietnam. I don't know if that'll continue, but that's something where I guess what I would say is you'll probably see less of these unilateral trade actions, both in Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, that generally will, I think, calm the waters, improve the bilateral relationship, get us into different types of conversations. I'm not saying trade actions aren't important. They are. But I'm just saying, I think there will probably be, the Trump administration feels like they do a lot of these trade actions. And I think you'll see something closer to the norm under if there's a President Biden first term in January. So I think that piece will feel a little different. There are, I guess I'll end here and say, some interesting defense opportunities. With Indonesia, the ROCs do a lot with Indonesian companies. The T-50, although that's had its ups and downs. The U.S. had a prohibition, on sales to Indonesia, which is a huge country in the region. That's now in the rearview mirror, and you've seen some Apache sales and some other things moving into that direction. So maybe there's a defense industrial piece to this that's not uninteresting. If you have asked me to brainstorm, I've always thought this kind of third country offset play has always been interesting to me, in terms of trying to buy down offsets in Korea that a defense industry company might have by working cooperatively in a third country, something like that, something creative in that space. So long and the short of it is, I think lots of possibilities. Definition is key. There'll be some divergence with different American presidents, especially I think in the trade and economic space. But I think by and large, a lot of continuity and focus continued in Southeast Asia, and some opportunities for the Korea alliance to play in that space in a trilateral or multilateral fashion.
Very dynamic region. For our very last question, I'd like to change gears slightly. It's from historian and researcher, Mr. Steve Clark, Lieutenant Colonel retired. But other members also expressed some curiosity. This could be a more lighthearted question or the opposite. It is March 5th, 2015. Sitting down for breakfast at the Sejong Center. Could you please expound on what happened that day and afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to take the question. And I'll just say, at the outset, people ask me, are you reticent to talk about it? And the long and the short of it is, I'm not. I don't go around advertising it or talk about it, unsolicited, but from time to time, when I get the question, it's good to answer because it's a bit cathartic. And if you don't talk about it, you can find yourself into you can go to a not great place. And I think so thanks for the question. That's all along the way of saying that. What happened was essentially, let me try to get on different. Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to get a different view here because somebody was not on mute, so I kept looking at their. There we go. All right, great. There we go. All right, so so what happened that day? How long do you want to go? How many hours do you have? I guess what I'll say is, every once in a while I just kind of think about how the different things that could have happened it turned out. And so I guess what I would say is, I almost canceled the speech. I was so mad. I got the speech from the embassy over the weekend. It wasn't a very good speech. I was up late Sunday night drafting it. And so I was almost like, I'm not going to do this. And then I decided, you know what, I better do this. I can't back out. And I do this a lot, right? I'd be like, oh, I'm not going to go. And then I go. So I went, and I was a little bit late. It was cold. I sat down, I had breakfast, and I was talking to a National Assembly member on one side and a kind of a union rep on the other. And this was an umbrella group of progressive voices, interesting group. And it's exactly the type of group that, you want to talk to as ambassadors, people who don't necessarily agree with you on every issue, but is a very engaged group in which you can find a lot of common ground and really learn from each other. So it was exactly the type of function in which you wanted to participate. Having breakfast and heard a loud noise, and the next thing you know, I remember just someone being almost on top of me. I remember kind of, the facial hair, and I remember kind of a glance at his clothes. He was wearing a hanbok, and at that point, I don't have a lot of memory. And but what people tell me is basically there was a fight. I essentially blocked the knife with my arm. The first shot went into my face, obviously. The second shot, though, went through my arm, and it was because I got my hands up, and my friend who was Master Chief SEAL team, who I learned how to box with in the Navy, was a former semi-pro boxer. He takes great credit for that moment, sadly. And anyway, so sort of what I remember, it's a little like the Tom Hanks scene in Saving Private Ryan. It was the swirl. You remember when he's on the beach and he's kind of in kind of a daze? It was the closest thing I tell people was like that. And your senses aren't quite there. And then I remember a dear friend, the public affairs officer, Robert Ogburn, kind of crying. And he was like, sir, sir, sir. He was like sobbing. And that just snapped me out of it. It was like instant. And then it was believe it or not, kind of the military training stuff. The checklist just kind of appeared in my head. It was be calm, literally thought about the golden hour for a flash, kind of wondered where I was hurt. Then it was like, okay, scan the room for secondary attackers, move off the X, right? Move off the X just 10 feet, right? Start to move, and then get out to the exit. And from there, it was interesting because, we can go into this in a little bit with the time left. There wasn't really a medevac or CASEVAC plan in place. The embassy, the limo had gone back to the embassy. So I'm standing there, and the whole time I'm kind of just trying to feel first instinctively if he got my carotid artery, right? And I kept feeling, I couldn't tell. I was asking people to check. I remember that vividly. And I remember there's like a little bit of blood on my collar, and that kind of like, that was the one time I kind of was like, oh man. But turns out didn't do it. And then I was like, the whole thing was just be calm, be calm, be calm, be calm. I thought actually for a minute about sitting down. You can kind of see it on film. And I just said, nope, I'm going to stand up. I'm okay. And I'm not bleeding that profusely. Then just quickly, there's a kind of a police car ambulates down the road. The not responding to the call at all. They were just on patrol. A reporter, Donga Ilbo reporter, runs out into the street, flags it down in the middle of Gwanghwamun. We get in the car, and this is where the one time I almost lost my temper. The great Foreign Service officer did a terrific job, Sung Chae. He's standing, he is trying to, he's taking charge of the situation, and he's doing a great job. But you guys know in the military, right, running a little hot, right, so he's kind of yelling. He's very concerned. He's a little spun up, not quite operating in the black, but a little lower. He's grabbing my arm to pull me into the car, and like that's what's wounded. So we get into the car, and but again, I don't want to take anything away from his performance. It was fantastic. It's just I'm sort of noting it humorous to build up to kind of a humorous note. So Sung starts yelling at the police in Korean to get to the hospital, which is 1,000 feet around the corner. I mean, I could walk there. It's right there, right? And I knew the neighborhood. It's right by the residence, right? So the police, who are not used to a lot of violence, hit the gas. The car goes roaring down the road, right? And at one point, I felt like the bodyguard who also got in the car with me was about to fall out. And at that point, it was the one time I kind of lost. I said, everybody slow. I'm yelling in English. They don't understand me. I'm yelling, everybody slow the bleep down, right? I'm not going to bleeping die on the way to the hospital, which I could walk to, right? And so we get there in one shape. We go into the wrong entrance. Sung, fortunately, gets us to the right place. And the rest, the doctors patched me up. I was really lucky. 2 centimeters away from the carotid artery. Also missed all the ducts right here in my eyes. There was a lot of good fortune. The doctors patched me up immediately, and then I'll end with this. Then kind of the media, craziness ensued. So I'm getting calls like from the president, getting calls from the State Department. Fortunately, my wife had not seen the incident on TV. People were able to get to her and get her to the hospital. I mean, she walked from the residence. So by the time this all hit the press, she had already been with me. Everything was okay. Final points, I'll just say humorously, we go to the second hospital because I'm going to Yonsei. And at that point, everybody is in overcompensation mode, right? At the actual incident, there's a few people who are reacting and a lot of, there's just chaos. Now it's everybody wants to help. And so we're all piled in this ambulance. People are overstaffing you. Okay, hey, sir, the sky's blue. Okay, because everybody's just in this mode of it's cold outside. I was like, yeah, I was just outside. And so it was that kind of thing. And watch out, there's cracks. There's a curb here. Somebody painted a line here. You're getting all this this overcompensating. So we get to the second hospital. One still camera, one television camera beats me there because the rest were back at the hospital because General Scaparrotti had just pulled up and he was almost like a decoy. They all stayed there. But there were two that were ready. So I get out of the ambulance and somebody at some point had changed me into scrubs and I've got a big bandage over my one hand and then people are holding my arms up unnecessarily, again, overstaffing. And I realize whoever changed me did not tie my scrubs tight enough. So they're falling down. I rip through the person holding up the other arm, grab them in the nick of time, right? And basically averted disaster. Anyway, so that's the humorous thing. But I will say the one thing is after the surgery, really, I got up and I just kind of felt, I was on TV, or I was watching TV and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to say something because what you're seeing from the Koreans is they're starting to blame themselves. And you're seeing like this whole thing, this guy just had a baby. The narrative was Korean name. He loves Korea. We were supposed to protect you. This narrative was forming and it was just spinning. So that's when Robert, the same press attaché, was at the bedside. He's like, we got to put something out. And so he's like, yep, let's do it. So we were sitting there and we said, I said like Sage and me doing great. I think people wanted to hear from me. And I was like, we need a Korean word here at the end. And we were both sitting there. It's like, let's do 같이 갑시다. And so we did that right at the end and it went out and you could just see it immediately turn, right? It was just a really important moment in strategic communications, turning that. And I'll just end on this because I got to run. I got to talk to my boss here. I think the other thing is to just remember, I think a lot of this was about risk management. And there's sort of this narrative of you either have to stay behind the embassy walls or be totally exposed. And I think the answer is in between, right? There's a continuum of risk. You have to do a realistic assessment. Shouldn't necessarily slow you down, but you got to know what you're getting into and calibrate accordingly. That was the other big, I think, takeaway for me in terms of lessons learned. Strategic communications, risk management, and crisis response. And I'll say finally, the last thing I'll say is it was the alliance at its best, right? Korean doctors, Korean journalists flagging people down in the streets, the police getting me to the hospital. It was just like exceptional, right? And the reaction to this day has been amazing. People still come up to me and like, Ajumas rub my scar and tell me they're sorry and all this. It's the best, right? It was the best. It was a moment of tragedy, and the true test of an alliance is how it responds in crisis. And it was remarkable. I mean, it was a remarkable response by the Korean government, the Korean people, the Americans, everybody involved. And I am just, to this day, so grateful for the response. So I'll end on that.
That was an amazing story, Mr. Ambassador. And I think it was worth, first of all, I'd like to apologize to our members for not leaving enough time at the end for question and answer. But I think that story was worth it. And if I may say, Mr. Ambassador, your humility and lightheartedness about the event are truly remarkable. I understand you have to go, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much for your comments. Do you have any final closing comments for our members?
No, just I guess the only thing I'd say is thanks for this group. It's just been terrific. It's a real opportunity, and just say, it's just such a great alliance in which to work. It's just so much fun. There's so much passion. The issues are real. So just for those of you who are active in doing it, enjoy it, and those who are outside or working on the commercial side or kind of the thought leadership piece, enjoy that too. It's just remarkable, important work. So, and we're all better off for it. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. I'd again like to extend our gratitude. It's been a real honor to moderate this opportunity. And thank you for sharing your vast knowledge and experience. We wish for your continued health and success and hope to be able to connect again in the future. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right. Good to see you guys. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.
For the individuals that braved COVID-19 to join us here at the DHL, I do invite you to please stay and mingle, enjoy some of the coffee and pastries. For our dues-paying members, that's where your money goes. So please make use of it. So thank you very much for your time today.